Alright, yeah, welcome to Magic Online. So this is going to be a newer series for the channel. It might be a little bit of an infrequent one, mostly because of the price of cards and me being a poor individual as I am. There are ways that you can support as well, though. If you do want to see more Magic Online content in the future, then supporting me on Patreon is a great way to get that to happen. So I've got currently 3 decks, including this one, already built and paid for, so we should have about 3 weeks worth of content, of course including this week. But if you want to see more, then supporting on Patreon is a great way to make sure that happens. I'll be building decks for Magic Online whenever possible though, so I'm also looking for feedback on this series as well. Just make sure that once you watch all the videos, let me know what you think, see if there's any room for improvement, all of that jazz. Anything you can do to support the series, support the channel, is greatly appreciated. Alright, anyway, what deck are we playing this week? We are playing an Aetherflux Reservoir deck, which is essentially Storm in Standard. So Aetherflux Reservoir is a 4 mana cost artifact. It says whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. And then this is our win con, so the secondary ability says pay 50 life, Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. So the goal of this deck is to get to 50 life, point 50 damage at our opponent, and win. So how do we do this? Well, we are going to be storming off, which does, for those who are not familiar with the keyword storm in Magic, it's effectively, it refers to the amount of spells that you've cast during a single turn. So in the case of Reservoir, the more spells we cast each turn, the more life we gain. So we want to be casting as many spells as possible. And the way we do this is by playing things like Bonesaw, which is a 0 mana cost artifact equipment. Its effect is really not too important whatsoever. We've also got Cathar Shields as well, which are also 0 mana cost equipments. And we've even got 2 copies of Ornithopter as well, which are also 0 cost. So we can play all of these for free. And that's really important for the Reservoir, because it means that we can play down our entire hand without actually having any mana untapped. There are ways, of course, that we can generate mana, but the nice little combo with Aetherflux Reservoir, the one card that must go with Aetherflux Reservoir most of the time, is Paradoxical Outcome. So Paradoxical Outcome is 3 and a blue, instant speed. Return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hands. And then you draw a card for each card that you've returned to your hand this way. So if you imagine we've got a Reservoir on the board and we play an Ornithopter, we gain 1 life for playing that Ornithopter. And then we'll play a Cathar Shield, we'll gain 2 life for playing that Cathar Shield, because you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast. And then we play a Bonesaw, we gain 3 life. But then we go for a Paradoxical Outcome. The Paradoxical Outcome gains us 4 life for casting it, and it bounces those 3 artifacts back to our hand, which draws us 3 cards and allows us to replay these. So then we gain 5 life, we gain 6 life, we gain 7 life. That's effectively how the deck works. And we want to do that up to 50 life so that we can win. We have ways to make sure that the combo goes off a little bit easier as well. We've got Sram, Senior Edificer. So for 1 and a white, we've got a 2/2 legendary creature. Whenever you cast an aura equipment, in the case of Bonesaw and Cathar Shield, you get to draw a card. It's not a May ability, so do watch out for milling yourself. It can happen in this deck. It's not a very common occurrence, but it does happen nonetheless. So this allows us, when we bounce all of our Paradoxical Outcome targets, all of our Cathar Shields, and we draw, when we play the Bonesaws and the Cathar Shields, we draw again. So we get to go through our deck. And the best thing that we can do when we're playing with Saram and these equipments is to draw into more equipments to keep redrawing, essentially, so that we can continue our Reservoir. We've then got a lot of quite expensive cards, and there's a way that we can make these cheaper as well. We've got Inspiring Statuary. Inspiring Statuary is a 3 mana cost artifact that says non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise. So effectively, Improvise allows us to make any non-artifact spell cheaper. So what you end up finding is that these Bonesaws and these Cathar Shields actually generate colourless mana as well, and they only cost 0 to cast them. So it's kind of like a colourless Mox Opal in Modern, that kind of thing. So you play them for 0 and they generate your mana. Well, Inspiring Statuary allows us to tap these in order to play our non-artifact spells. So Sram can cost 1 white mana by tapping a Cathar Shield and then playing the 1 white mana. Supreme Will could cost us 1 blue mana by tapping 2 Ornithopters or an Ornithopter and a Cathar Shield, that kind of thing. And that's just generally why the Inspiring Statuary is here. It makes things stupidly cheap, especially Paradoxical Outcome is really nice with the Inspiring Statuary, because Paradoxical Outcome can cost 1 blue mana, and then you can bounce all of the tapped artifacts that you've just used to cast Paradoxical Outcome, replay them, and you've just generated some more mana for you to reuse again, so that the next Paradoxical Outcome only costs 1 blue. Is that kind of thing. In the main board, we also have ways to protect the combo. We've got Supreme Will, so for 2 and a blue, instant speed, we get to choose one of these abilities. We get to counter the target's spell unless its controller pays 3, so this is some early game counter magic, or maybe late game depending on what our opponent's doing. Can be quite disruptive. This is our only main board counter, but we do have plenty in the sideboard as well to help us against control, but this just makes sure that some of our more important things, like our Reservoir, like our Paradoxical Outcome, make sure that they stick. But the secondary ability as well, if we're not planning on countering anything, we get to look at the top 4 cards of our library, put one of them in our hand, and the rest on the bottom in any order. So we get to go find our combo pieces, essentially. Either Paradoxical Outcome or Reservoir is really nice here, but maybe we're actually digging for some more triggers for our outcome, so maybe we'll find a Cathar Shield, or even find a land if we're missing our land drops, that kind of thing. We then have Glimmer of Genius, yet again, so that we can find our combo pieces. Glimmer is 3 and a blue for instant speed, scry 2, draw 2, and gain 2 energy. So we get to go 4 cards deep looking for all of our combo pieces. With the Inspiring Statuary, it only costs 1 blue mana, so that can be really cool. For the most part, though, we're just looking for all of our pieces together. Or maybe if we've already gathered the pieces in our hand, then we're just going to try and find Cathar Shields and Bone Saws, or even Sram, so we can draw off of the artifacts. We then have Burrells Expertise. This 5-drop slot here, I should mention, is quite the flexible one, so most of these end up coming out in this sideboard, but they could also come out for other cards if you want to make changes as well. Burrells Expertise, though, is really good in creature-based matchups. So Burrells Expertise is 3 and 2 blue for sorcery speed. Return up to 3 target artifacts and or creatures to their owner's hand. So we get to bounce 3 of our opponent's things, and then we get to cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. So 4 or less is pretty much anything over here. Most of all, we can bounce all of our opponent's stuff to slow them down, and then play a Reservoir off of that, which might allow us to play all of our 0-drop stuff. So it's a nice little curve there. We're getting a lot of value from Burrells Expertise in the right circumstance. We then have Cloudblazer as well. Yet again, another way to gain some life, but also to draw some cards as well, which gathers our combo. I do like Cloudblazer in the situations where maybe our reservoirs have been dealt with and we have to go for combat damage. It is very hard to win by combat damage in this deck, but it is doable. So Cloudblazer is a 3, a white and a blue. With the statuary on board, can cost just a white and a blue for a 2/2 flyer that enters the battlefield, gains 2 life, and draws 2 cards. So, yet again, finds us what we need, refills our hand, allows us to maybe get more triggers on the reservoir. Most of the time, you'll see me bring this one straight out in the sideboard game 1. It is the flex slot. I'm not entirely certain about it, but it is good in game 1 nonetheless. We've then got the Whir of Inventions. So Whir of Inventions is 3 blue, X, instant speed. It has Improvise, which, as we mentioned with Improvise, allows us to tap our artifacts to generate mana in order to pay for it. So all of our Bone Saws can be 1 mana artifacts, essentially. We get to search our library for an artifact with converted mana cost X or less, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle our library. So you may notice that we are running a combo with one of the combo pieces being a 3 of, and that's because we're running Whir of Invention. Whir of Invention effectively gives us 5 copies of Reservoir, because if we find a Whir, we can essentially go grab a Reservoir with it. Or if we've already got the Reservoir, then we can go grab the Statuary, that kind of thing. Worst case scenario, it grabs us a Ornithopter, that kind of thing. So Whir of Invention, really good for finding our pieces there. And The worst thing this deck can do is not find its reservoir effectively, because it doesn't really do much without it. As I mentioned, combat damage is the only way to get around that with Cloud Blazer. So we're really wanting to find this reservoir, and that's why we're running additional copies. Onto the mana base. I'll get to the sideboard soon, which is why I'm moving this preview pen. We've got Ether Hubs. So Ether Hubs are effectively a 5-colour land. In this one, 2-colour land. When they enter the battlefield, you gain energy. You can tap them for colourless, which is not too bad in a deck full of colourless artifacts. But it also allows us to tap, pay energy, add 1 mana of any colour to our mana pool. So we can play the Cloud Blazers, we can play the Srams, we can play all of our blues off of the Ether Hubs. It's pretty sweet. We've then got Inventor's Fairs as well. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. Very easy to pull off in this deck. Adds colourless to our mana pool, which is not a problem whatsoever. But the final ability is the reason to run Inventor's Fair. Pay 4, tap it, sacrifice Inventor's Fair, and search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. You can only do this if you have 3 or more artifacts. So we just put down 3 or more Bone Saws and Cathar Shields, essentially. So Inventor's Fair also allows us to go grab our reservoir, or even our statuary, so that we can make things real cheap, if that ends up being the case. I imagine that wouldn't be too much of an issue, though, with Inventor's Fair, because you effectively have to tap 5 mana. Which includes the Inventor's Fair's tap ability as in that calculation. So you probably are not struggling on mana, since that is the top of your curve, but it might be nice to go get the statuary so you can make paradoxical outcomes cost 1 mana, that kind of thing, and really combo off. So after that we've got 6 islands and 3 plains, just allows us to get all of our colours on time. We're not running much white, which is why we're running only 3 plains, and we do also have a lot of dual lands as well, which really helps cast all of the stuff. Speaking of, we've got 4 copies of Port Town. As Port Town enters the battlefield, you may reveal a plains or an island, and if you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. So it can be a turn 1 untapped dual land. We can use Prairie Streams to untap it as well. With that kind of thing, it's really nice and smooths out the draws. Make sure that we have colours on time. I very rarely get mana screwed with this deck in terms of missing colours, essentially, just because of the mana base. We then have Prairie Streams as well. Prairie Streams are a plains and an island, so as I mentioned, you can reveal them to Port Town. And they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. These are probably the hardest to get to come into play at the right time. But we do run a lot of basics as well, so there is a good chance that later on in the game that these come into play untapped. Late in the game, you want to have as many dual lands as possible untapped as well, so that you can improvise from Inspiring Statuaries and get these nice and cheap. For the most part, you only really need blue mana, so if you have to focus on a specific colour, focus on blue, but white mana can be quite important as well. Sram on turn 2 with a load of Bone Saws in your hand is absolutely awesome. So, onto the sideboard. The sideboard's pretty simple. We've got a nice blue package on the right, which is our counterspell package. So we've got Void Shatters, which you can change for disallows. I only left Void Shatter in here for budget reasons, because I think disallows are like 3 ticks more than a Void Shatter. So Void Shatter is 1 and 2 blue for an instant speed devoid. Counter target spell. If it was countered this way, exile it and put it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So there is a bit of Reanimator going around these days. So you could maybe get Void Shatter to hit one of the Reanimator targets, and then it would go into exile instead of the graveyard, and your opponent won't be able to get any value out of it. For the most part though, it's just a hard counter for anything we might want to deal with. We then have 3 copies of Negate. Negate is 1 and a blue, instant speed, counter target non-creature spell. This is here for the counter spell control matchups. Essentially, we just want to be able to counter anything they put down. So counter their counter spells, counter their planeswalkers, counter their enchantments, because cast out is a quite popular thing nowadays, so Negate hits that. For the most part, that's why Negate's here. And then we have 2 copies of Dispel as well. So Dispel is 1 blue mana, instant speed, counter target instant spell, yet again for the counter matchups, to make sure that we're landing our spells, because the worst thing for a combo deck is a control deck, so we want to be able to land our paradoxical outcomes and our Aetherflux reservoirs, and a 1 mana counter spell for their counter is pretty sweet. We then have 2 copies of Fumigate over on the white, so for 3 and 2 white, Sorcery speed, destroy all creatures, you gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. So this really helps us with the reservoir. If our opponent's gone really wide, then we can actually destroy their entire board state, which is good for us as it stands, but we also gain life for each creature as well, which gets us closer to that 50 life, closer to that win condition. We then have 3 copies of Solemnity. Solemnity is a 2 and a white enchantment. Says that players cannot get counters, and counters cannot be placed on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. The main reason Solemnity is in here is for any energy matchups we might come across. Green-red pummeler, black-white energy, black-green energy, sorry. Because Solemnity stops energy altogether. Players cannot get counters, and energy is a counter. So if you slam down a Solemnity, your opponent can no longer get energy for as long as Solemnity is on the board. So it can really shut down a lot of the value that they get. Their Harness Lightnings, their Bristling Hydras, their Pummelers, for example, cannot generate any energy, so they can't actually put anything on their creatures anymore. It's really solid for completely hosing their deck. We've then got 2 copies of Forsake the Worldly. So for 2 and a white, instant speed, exile target artifact or enchantment. So artifacts to exile are Scrapheap Scrounger and Gear Hulks, that kind of thing. And enchantments are things like, if we're against Mill, for example, Fraying Sanity is a good option. Most of all, though, it's here for things like Cast Out, because Cast Out will take down our reservoirs. We can Forsake the Worldly, get back our reservoir, and continue as though it had not happened. It also has Cycling as well, so we can pay 2 to discard this card and get a redraw. So if it turns out that it's not immediately useful to us, then we can just get a redraw. So it's not the end of the world. There's less risk running Forsake the Worldly, since we can just get rid of it if it doesn't work. The last card is Gideon's Defeat. So for 1 white mana, instant speed, exile target white creature that's attacking or blocking. If it was a Gideon Planeswalker, you gain 5 life. So this card is in here specifically for the new Gideon. So if I go over to Gideon, you're not going to show me, are you? Gideon, standard, show me. He's probably not going to be here. He's in the old Almond Cat. But yeah, the Gideon that says that you cannot lose the game, this is here for him, essentially. Because if he ends up making that emblem, that means we have to generate 100 life with Aetherflux Reservoir, because we have to kill Gideon first. We can, of course, use Cloudblazer to take him down, but he might just replace it with another Gideon. So Gideon's Defeat is here for when he goes for his attacks, we exile his Gideon, because once he's made that emblem, he's probably going to start either ticking up on our reservoir, which would suck, but sometimes he might be wanting to get in for that attack, so Gideon's Defeat allows us to do that, and the worst case scenario, it hits a white creature. So that's essentially the deck anyway, guys. If you did enjoy the look of it, then be sure to check out the matches, which should already be out. I should post all 3 of them at the same time, so I hope you guys really enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, then it's really important to me that you hit that like and subscribe button as well, so you get notifications when new videos go up, and it supports the channel as well. If you hit that bell icon especially, you will get notifications for future videos. I do hope you enjoyed, and don't forget to leave some feedback on the series as well. It will really help out for future videos on MTGO. I do hope you enjoyed anyway, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.